Shout out Owens Exhibit, the #1 podcast on the internet.
I thought I was prepared to come in front of the camera today and sit down and have a conversation, a solo conversation, no guests, nobody else in the room, just myself, my own thoughts, my voice, talking to the audience, whoever's out there listening to this podcast. I guess I do want to start out by saying, I'm so appreciative for the people that I've tuned into the podcast so far, that have supported it, that have found it through various different channels, that have come by word of mouth. So thank you to everybody who's listened to an episode, if not many of episodes. And I'm happy to say that the last episode you listened to is just a thing of the past. We're really looking forward to the future, and there's so much more planned. That's why I thought it would be a good idea to sit down and have a conversation about who I am, what the podcast is, and what's going to be happening in the future. So really, to begin this, I need to talk a little bit about myself. So for those of you who don't know, my name's Owen Patterson, and I'm 21 years old. I have had a bit of a journey so far. Pretty much, I would say around high school time, I decided I wanted to go to college for entrepreneurship, and it really felt like something I was going to dive into and learn a lot about and be able to start a business of my own right after college. So I decided I would study at Drexel University in Philadelphia. And after about 2 years of school there, I decided I wanted to go adventure out. I'm not going to get into all of the details, but basically the part of the story I want to get to is I really wanted real world experience, and I really wanted to dive off the deep end into the water and really just get my foot in the door, get all the experience that I can in the real world, and learn from people and start businesses, start failing, start learning. And that's what I did. So about 3 years ago now was my first time really living in New York, which is where I am now. And I've been living here for 3 years on and off, about 2 years total. And at this point in time, I am now working freelance as a creative consultant and producer. So creative consultancy, that's mainly for photo shoots, editorial shoots, e-commerce shoots, stuff like that, really having to do with the direction of the shoot, the props, the overall visuals that come out of that. And then with producing and production, I help out on events. My main focus is with fashion shows. It's how I really got introduced to the whole thing, and maybe I'll go into that more in the future. But for now, these are the things that really propel me and things I'm very interested in right now. And as you know, I'm also the host of this podcast. So that brings me to my next point, which is talking about this podcast and how it all got started, what the purpose is, and where we are headed in the future. So the beginnings of this podcast, I have to say, it didn't start at the beginning. It had to do with me finding podcasting a long time ago, not a long time ago, not at the inception of it, not when Joe Rogan and when all these first podcasters were doing it. So the first time I started a podcast, I wasn't even listening to podcasts at this time, besides one that could be considered. It was more of a talk show with a visual format. It wasn't strictly audio. And that was the It's called Full Size Run. It was run by Soul Collector. I think Complex Media took it over. Basically, Matthew Welty, Brendan Dunn, and Trinidad James were the host of this podcast talk show that brought on guests to talk about their experiences with sneakers, streetwear, and how they got into it. So that was really my first introduction to it. And I can't exactly pinpoint if that was the influence for me wanting to have my own audio formatted conversation style. And I don't know exactly, but I do know back in 2018, maybe 2017, I came across Anchor. And that's what this is free promotion. Anchor, it's what I started my podcast on. I pretty much took my phone, made an account, and I used the phone speaker as the microphone. And with that, I had conversations with a few of my friends. One, I just sat down and we talked about, sneaker releases coming out. We talked about what we're interested in, some of our idols. It was just a very unformatted conversation. And then another one of them was sitting down with my friend who at the time was doing this brand, a cut and sew brand. And so we, dove into everything that he learned from the process of starting his brand and what he wanted to do moving forward with his brands. And that was honestly the first episode of really what I wanted to do with this, what I wanted to do with the podcast. So that brings me to, that's really the first time I got introduced to podcasting, but I should now move forward to how Owen's Exhibit got started. It was when I was at Drexel University. I knew I wanted to do a podcast around 2020. I'm not too sure why I ever stopped, that first podcast. I think it was because I really needed to learn how to build something around a purpose, around a mission, how to set the goals for that, and how to scale it. And obviously, you can jump into anything without learning those things. But for me, I really wanted to have some direction. I felt like I had no direction. So once I finally got into college and started learning about how to build business plans and how to make goals and how to take the first steps into a idea, that's when I decided I wanted to start the podcast again. And it was also because I was a young entrepreneur looking for people who I could relate to, who I could look up to. So I thought, what better than to find people like me, find doers, find makers, bring them onto the podcast, shed light on their stories, and be able to motivate and encourage people who are like-minded to do the same if they haven't already taken their own steps. And also give knowledge to people that are on their journeys from experienced entrepreneurs, because everybody can learn from another person's story. So 2020, January, is when the first recording happened, and I had spent time doing the branding. At that time, I had just done graphic design class, and I wanted to do the branding for the podcast. So I spent it was more of a procrastinate, or I kept putting it off and off and off, and I would make a logo, and then I'd be like, okay, I can't start the podcast without doing this logo. And then finally one day, went to the library, spent 3 hours, 4 hours there watching this one video on how to do this graffiti logo. And I pretty much followed the video perfectly. that to say, I didn't add any of my own creativity on it, and I didn't really try to enhance the logo. So it came down to just what the logo you see now is not the ideal logo. But where it stumbled me was the fact that I was so focused on the visuals, the overall branding of the podcast that I completely forgot about doing the podcast, or I just kept putting off recording an episode. So it finally came. I did that logo in the library. I don't know if it was the same night or sometime later, but in my dorm room, it was, I want to say 1 a.m., if not like 2 a.m., maybe on a Thursday night or something like that. And I decided to do the first episode, which is out there. I don't know much longer it'll be out there, but I had to start. I had to take a leap and begin on this journey. So now it's been about 3 years of doing this, and there's lots that I've learned from doing this. There's lots that I would like to do better, and I'm prepared to share these stories with you and give you an insight into my journey and also other people's journeys as we continue to do this. So with doing this, there's some things I would like to share about what I've learned so far, what I think I can do better, and then get on to what's happening in the future. If I haven't already mentioned, the purpose I wanted to do this podcast was because I haven't been so personal. I haven't added my own insight. I haven't conveyed what the whole purpose of this podcast is. And it's really been a negative, I would say, because of the fact that I'm unable to build the community that I want around this podcast. So the main focus is entrepreneurship or creatives, people who are doing this journey independently, if not people that are really out there with this ambitious spirit. People who just want to dive into roles, who know they're good enough, who are willing to learn, who are willing to fail, but day in and day out, they'll make sure to improve upon the person and the skills that they had the day before. That's who I am, and that's who I hope to connect with and inspire with this podcast. This is attached to the triumphs and the lessons I've learned from this podcast. So far doing this podcast, I've obviously ran into issues such as corrupting files or losing the recording on the camera so you just have the audio, or messing up the audio so it's completely there's so much crackling in it, nobody will want to listen to that. And those are things that happen. Those are things that happen to people who have even prepared themselves a lot. It happens to everybody. So the most valuable lessons I guess I can talk about have to do with the building of it, the foundation of it. And when I started, what I was doing was I was reaching out to people in my network, people that I knew, people that I've talked to before, people that I wanted to bring on because it felt good in my intuition. I felt like they had some sort of value to add. I wasn't so focused on making the biggest impression on people out there. I wasn't focused on getting the biggest celebrities. I was just doing it based on who I liked. It was very, very passive in a way. It was very just like, oh, I like you. I like your story. You know what? I think I have time next week. Let's do a podcast together. And that's how I've been doing it for some time now. I'm going to get into what's happening moving forward, but I want to talk about lessons. With this said, I have realized that it is good to pick guests that add into the purpose of your podcast. And one of the negatives to what I was doing was not curating the selection based on what message I was trying to get out there. It was really just going and finding people that I knew and putting them on a platform where they could talk about things. And what I'm trying to get at is basically it came down to people would later contact me and want to come on the podcast and do a long formatted episode, and we'd have this conversation and it would be great. But the issue with it was people were not coming to my podcast to listen to me for the perspective that I brought or the curation of guests that I had. Nobody was coming to listen to these episodes because of me. And that had to do with me not being a host in a way. It had to do with me being just a moderator, just somebody who would ask a question and want to elicit a response. So I figured out that I was bringing on people that wanted to do these podcasts to get some content. Obviously, I enjoyed every episode that I've done to this point, and obviously none of these people I'm, regretful for bringing on. Everybody I'm super happy to have had on, and I'm saying this because they were willing to come on to get some content for whatever they were promoting or to want an opportunity to speak. And that was always something I wanted to provide people with the opportunity to share their stories. The issue with that was it wasn't building on a community. It was people in it for their own motivations. And now I would like to curate this better. I would like to reach out to people that I find are really well aligned with what I'm trying to do, and also be more personal, share more perspectives, give insight into my experiences, and really allow you to get to know me, get to connect with this community that I'm building. Other trials that I've faced have to do with a lot of the mental ideas that you have in your mind of this could be better. I don't like how this was shot. Like, I know, of course, I'm going to go and edit this. I don't even know if this recording is going to come out, but I know I'm going to think I could have said this differently. I didn't share every perspective that I wanted to share, and I'm going to think about how I can do it better. But in order to progress with this, I'm going to need to put something out. I'm going to need to make sure I cross this off on my list and get to the next episode. So that's what I'm doing now. And for anybody out there that's dealing with those mental battles, put out the imperfect. Make note of the imperfections and then correct them the next episode. So I will be making notes on what I would have liked to do differently, and I'm going to better them in the next episode. So be prepared for some solo episodes. Those will probably dive into how I've gone about improving the podcast, my everything down to, the editing of the podcast, the creation of the content, the rebranding, the selection of guests, the behind the scenes. It will have to do with everything related to the podcast. I may even do some episodes about how things are going in my personal journey, some lessons I've recently learned, and more about the things that I'm involved in. The other thing that is worth mentioning is the selection of guests that are coming on. These are going to be people much like our past guests, creatives, entrepreneurs, everybody from musicians, producers, artists, painters, clothing designers, business owners. I can go on and on, but you understand the gist. It's people who are doing things on their own, making something, contributing to culture. I think that's really one of the best summaries I can give. I love the culture, and I want to find people that align with my vision of the culture. We all have our own perspectives of what this culture is and who's the main players in the culture. For me, those are a lot of Black people, a lot of hip hop, a lot of people doing artistic and really freely expressing themselves. It's really people that are tastemakers. I know these are the leaders that are not just following the trends, but setting them. It has to do with tastemakers. So these are going to be the people that are going to be a focus of the podcast. And I'm really excited to get into a lot about their journeys. We're going to cover everything from how they were brought up, what they're doing now, and talk about some of their most notable accomplishments. Those are 3 of the main hitters of the episodes, so we're going to dive into those. The change that I'm going to be announcing is we're going to do some short form content. I don't know how deep I want to get into it yet, but short form video content, those are going to be featuring guests, and there's going to be obviously a visual side to that. Those are going to be mainly posted on YouTube. So if you're not already, go ahead and follow on YouTube. It's at owens.exhibit. The other thing obviously is frequency, how frequent these episodes are going to come out. You can expect an episode 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Sundays every week. That is the mission that I'm going for, and it's what is going to happen from here on out. So thank you for tuning in to this episode, and I'm looking forward to what's to come.